Hey there, Focus Learners, and welcome back. I am so incredibly thrilled to have you here for today's explainer, because we're going to look at something that is absolutely foundational to literally any successful organization. We're demystifying the essential, life-saving blueprints of high-stakes environments, standard operating procedures, or as we all know them, SOPs. Because whether you realize it or not, the invisible architecture that keeps our modern world running smoothly, from the medicines we take every day to the planes we fly in, relies entirely on these documents. But let's ground this right away with a pretty crucial question. What actually separates a perfectly safe, humming-along laboratory from a total absolute disaster? Well, fun fact, in many major lab disasters, the root cause wasn't some sudden explosion of chemicals. No, it was an implosion of basic process. Think about it for a second. When a massive audit fails, when priceless research samples are completely ruined, or worse, when human safety is compromised, it is rarely a lack of talent in the room. It's almost always a breakdown in process. And that exact chaos is what our operational hero, the SOP, is designed to prevent. So here's our game plan for today. First, what exactly is an SOP? Second, the real purpose behind SOPs. Third, we'll break down the anatomy of an SOP. And finally, we'll look at clinical trial lab SOPs in action. Okay, let's dive right into Section 1. What is an SOP? Defining the standard. So, at its very core, an SOP is a set of written instructions documenting a routine or repetitive activity to achieve uniformity of performance. Now, I want you to really lock on to that last phrase right there, uniformity of performance. These aren't just broad, sweeping guidelines or helpful little hints. These are incredibly detailed instructions that exist for one specific, unwavering reason: to ensure that specific functions are performed the exact same way, uniformly, every single time, totally regardless of who happens to be on shift that day.
And here is the real kicker. SOPs have the force of a directive. We're not talking about mere suggestions here. In a laboratory setting, they address absolutely all the requirements needed to perform procedures safely without any loss of effectiveness. When you're handling highly volatile chemicals or super-sensitive patient data, you simply cannot afford ad hoc, on-the-fly decision-making. The SOP is the law of the lab. But, there's a hard truth we have to face here. SOPs will fail if they are not followed. Therefore, the use of SOPs needs to be reviewed and reinforced by management. I mean, the best, most beautifully written document in the world is essentially useless if it just sits in a binder collecting dust on a shelf, right? Management plays an absolutely critical role here. They've got to be the active champions of the SOP, constantly reviewing, updating, and enforcing its usage. The stakes are simply way too high for complacency.
Moving right along to Section 2, the purpose of SOPs. Why do we actually need them?
Let's map out the intent of an SOP to its real-world outcome, kind of like connecting the dots. First, the goal of providing all the necessary info to perform a job, well, that results in a highly effective training tool for your new staff. Second, the goal of detailing recurring work processes, that directly guarantees uniformity, consistency, and top-tier data quality. And third, the goal of ensuring regulatory compliance, that essentially builds in your quality control and quality assurance. These organization-specific documents are the actual bridge between your high-level goals and your vital day-to-day operational outcomes. All right, Section 3, the anatomy of an SOP. Let's look at how to actually write these things. So, let's pull out our scalpels and dissect this document, starting with the foundational front matter. Any proper technical SOP requires a clear title page. And honestly, this needs to be incredibly specific. You need the title, a unique ID number, the date of issue or revision, the specific agency or branch it applies to, and, crucially, the signatures of the people who actually prepared and approved it. Next, if it's a long document, you're obviously going to need a table of contents for easy navigation. And third, you must include a references section for all cited materials or any other attached SOPs in the appendix. This basically sets up clear identification and ease of reference from literally page 1. Okay, so once you get past all that formal front matter, you finally arrive at the methodology and procedures. And let me tell you, this is the absolute meat of the issue. This is where the actual action happens. When we really break down the core anatomy, you realize SOPs require an insanely dense level of detail. It moves from the initial scope and applicability right down to the nitty-gritty, step-by-step methodology and decision factors. It's not just a quick guide on what to do. It's about anticipating and addressing all the what-ifs and any possible interferences that could pop up.
Let's zoom in on these critical inner organs just a bit more. Your scope and applicability defines the core purpose, the limits, the regulatory standards, and exactly who is responsible for what. You also absolutely need a clarification of terminology, mostly because misunderstood acronyms can cause deadly mistakes in a lab. Then we have health and safety warnings, and let me be emphatically clear here, you must absolutely never gloss over this section. Never. These warnings need their own dedicated section, plus they have to be listed right alongside the specific procedural steps where they become an issue. And finally, equipment and supplies. This has to be a complete, exhaustive list of what you need, exactly when you need it, and exactly where to find it.
Which brings us to Section 4, Clinical Trial Lab SOPs, the ultimate high-stakes application.
Now, clinical trials, they are massive, highly complex beasts. I mean, just think about the sheer scale of early-stage operational prep that clinical trial SOPs have to cover. You need a standardized process for how a simple query is addressed. You need SOPs for the project research, for the submission of proposals, for how the study team is introduced to each other, and for the preparation and approval of document formats. You need an SOP for getting supplies to investigator sites, and yes, you literally even need an SOP for how to conduct the dummy run. The preparation phase alone requires an absolute mountain of standardization.
And then, what happens once the trial actually goes active? Well, the strict standardization definitely doesn't stop. Every single action demands rigorous oversight. We're talking specimen collection, the registration of those very samples, how they are stored, how the lab results are officially reported, how the sensitive data is securely transferred, all the way right down to the final audit. If literally any of these links break, the entire multi-million-dollar clinical trial can be completely compromised. SOPs are the glue holding the scientific integrity of the whole trial together.
Which ultimately brings us to the most important question you need to ask yourself today. Do you just write SOPs, or do you actually enforce them? I really want you to take a second and reflect on your own workplace culture right now. We've seen today how meticulously these blueprints have to be crafted to ensure safety, quality, and compliance. But remember that quote from earlier? An unenforced blueprint is a failed one. So take a hard look at the binders sitting on your office shelves. Are they living, breathing documents guiding your team's success every day, or are they just an illusion of safety? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.